My name is Dr. Brian. I got my start in paleontology when I was 3 years old in a museum like this. So when I was 3, my brother had just been born and my mom wanted me out of the house for a little while. And where I grew up in Dallas, Texas, they had science classes for little kids in Fair Park near the Dallas Museum of Natural History. One of the very first classes I took was on dinosaurs and fossils and paleontology. And part of that is they took us to the Dallas Museum of Natural History, where I got to see some of the fossils they had there. And so when I was 3 years old, I decided that yes, I wanted to be a paleontologist and work in a museum. And off and on, I have done that, for most of my life. And so I have come largely full circle to work here again at a museum, doing what I said I would do when I was 3. We are a small museum. You're located in Hillsborough in Sheffield, and we specialize in fossils and other natural history specimens that come from Yorkshire in general and Sheffield in specific. So most of our fossils located along this wall are from the coast up around Whitby and Scarborough and Robin Hood's Bay. Yorkshire is famous for having its own Jurassic coast. Not as famous as the one down south, but it is a similar time and a similar environment with a slightly different view of an ancient world from about 180 to 190 million years ago. So all of these fossils in this cabinet were once in the cliffs at the Yorkshire coast, and each one of them has fallen out and was collected and brought to this museum. And so what we're looking at are traces of what the world looked like almost 200 million years ago, in which Sheffield and all of Yorkshire were covered by a warm tropical sea with different islands dotted about. Think Hawaii or the Caribbean. And I like to think about those islands on a cold and rainy day here in Sheffield. And so, because of that, most of the fossils we have in our collections are marine fossils. They are ancient sea life from animals that lived here that long ago. And so we have a lot of remains of ancient shells, specifically ammonites, small octopus or squid-like creatures that lived here a long time ago. They are incredibly diverse. There are over 300 species known from Yorkshire alone, and of which we have a fair amount of. So we have those, we have a number of other shells, we even find fish and a few sea monsters. And so let me show you our flagship specimen, if you could follow me here. This is Hilda, and she is a sea monster who lived here about 180, 90 million years ago. She is a plesiosaur. These are the animals that the Loch Ness Monster legend is based upon. And you can see an example up above us. Now, plesiosaurs traditionally come in 2 varieties. There's the long-necked, short-head version, like the one you just saw, and then there is the long-head version with a short neck, the pliosaurs. Hilda is special. She has a medium-length neck and a medium-length head. She is a special other group of plesiosaur called the Romaleosaurs. And this group is rare the entire world over except for Yorkshire. We have an inordinate number of this group of plesiosaurs here, of which Hilda is a special kind of. And if you go to the Natural History Museum down in London or to Dublin, you will see fossils of gigantic versions of these. And Hilda is not that big, but she is an adult. And so we think Hilda might be a new species known to science, and one of our staff members and a former intern is working on Hilda for his dissertation. And so hopefully sometime soon, in a year or so, you will come in here and you will see Hilda with her new name. So that is where most of our fossils go. However, we have fossils here from Sheffield, including some extremely close. Wherever you find fossils in wherever you find rocks in Sheffield, you have a good chance of finding fossils. Most famously, the collieries of Sheffield are mining coal, and coal itself is a type of fossil made from ancient trees millions of years ago. So we have fossils here that are not only found in Sheffield, but from fossils found up the street for about 150 feet away. And so in this cabinet over here, we have fossils found from Sheffield itself, including one 150 feet away. So that would be this cabinet down to there and this cabinet here. So in Sheffield and areas around here, you find fossils from the ocean and ones from up on land. And the ones from the ocean are these ancient reefs that were populated by relatives of the starfish. These are crinoids, or as they're called today, sea lilies. So they had arms like a starfish, but they were on a stalk, and they would just wave their arms in the water to filter feed. We have a number of other fossils, such as the goniatites. These are coiled shell relatives of the octopus and squid, different from the ammonite, but the one that comes about 150 feet away, which was found in someone's back garden, is one of those as well. We also find brachiopods or lamp shells in and around Sheffield from an ancient ocean that was here over 300 million years ago. We also have traces of an ancient forest that existed here from that time. And in Sheffield, we find remains of ancient giant trees. These are trees that we get up to 60 meters in height. Most of them come from types of plants that don't make trees today. So perhaps the most famous one of these is the lepidodendron, or scale tree. And when these were originally found, they thought they were giant snakes because the bark on these trees look a bit like scales. No, it comes from a giant tree related to modern day club moss. This is from a moss that tried to grow a tree. But this is what it was like 300 million years ago. All these different groups of plants that traditionally don't grow trees would make a huge tree. And so we had giant horsetails and giant club mosses and giant tree ferns and the very first conifers. And so if you lived 300 million years ago, you could have had the first Christmas tree. And so what we often find in rocks around Sheffield are traces of these plants, such as their roots, their branches, their barks. And when they originally found these, they found them separately and they gave them each a different name. Only later on did they find out that they all mostly belonged to one giant kind of tree. Trigonotarbid from Rotherham. Now, this is from an animal that looks like a spider, but it isn't a spider. It has 10 legs, depending on how you count them. We don't have them around anymore, but we do have the living arachnids such as spiders. Dunelm has set up a relationship with the Natural History Museum down in London to make their wallpaper more scientifically accurate. And so it's a whole line that Dunelm has with the Natural History Museum. But strange enough, our skeleton of Velociraptor isn't scientifically accurate, but our wallpaper is. The Velociraptor on our wallpaper is holding its hands in the correct position, as you would have in real life. And so for quite a few of these, what we have done is we've gone in and CT scanned one of our fossils and then 3D printed out an exact copy and then painted it and restored it to what it would have looked like in real life. So you can see an exact version of the fossil, what it would look like. So we have a lovely ammonite, which we scanned, and our conservator Megan painted a copy to what it would have looked like in real life. So she's done that one. We have a few of these around. So a lovely bivalve or scallop there that she's done. I quite like the sea urchin she did. She likes the color purple. And perhaps the best one we have on display is our fish, Dipidium. We have the original fossil, and then a replica made from a CT scan of the actual specimen, what it looked like in real life. Oh, and her favorite, our little lobster that she did, which is a coprolite. That is a fossilized remain of an animal's poo. And Yorkshire is surprisingly famous for that. We even have one that we cut open and polished, one to show what was on the inside of a coprolite, and also prove that, yeah, it is possible to polish a turd. There's another wallpaper from down. This is our preparation room where we prepare our fossils and bring in people for lab experiences, where we each give a person a fossil ammonite and they prepare a rock about 2 hours to expose a fossil that they get to keep and take home. This is a specimen that people originally get when they come to do a lab experience. They don't look like much, but each one of these contains a fossil. So this is Isabel. Now we give a lot of names to our various fossils we have here. We have Frank, we have Hilda, but Isabel is the only one of which we know the gender. On opening day for the museum back in 2022, it was noticed that inside Isabel, what we're looking at here is sort of a fossil of her chest. So her chest cavity's been polished. You can see her various ribs there. It was noticed that there on the inside of Isabel was some small and less well-formed bones. There's a long bone that forks at the end, like this bone. And there is a series of cylindrical bones all in a row, like these, inside her chest cavity. And so on opening day of the museum, we discovered that we had an ichthyosaur fossil with babies on the inside. Ichthyosaurs were fish reptiles, but they did not lay eggs. They gave birth to live young. And so this is the only fossil in our museum that we know if it's a boy or a girl. So one of the very first things people will notice when they walk into our museum is our Eutyrannus skull. Now, we wanted a Tyrannosaur in our museum, but Tyrannosaurus would have taken up the entire room and not had room for anything else, including people. So we found his younger and older cousin, Eutyrannus. So he's about half the size of a Tyrannosaurus, a much more manageable size. Now, the original specimen is in China and literally flatter than a pancake. If you took out the bones out of the rock, you would have destroyed it. So fortunately, these days we have scanning and 3D printing technology. So using digital versions of the bones and working with artists, you can make three-dimensional copies of flat specimens. And so you can mount them instead of the actual bones. And so what we are doing right now is printing out the bones of Eutyrannus one at a time, and he has over 300 bones. And so when we finish the skull, which is about 30 bones, we put that on display. And we are currently printing out the rest of the skeleton. And so sometime this year, if you come into our museum, you will see a life-size mounted version of our Eutyrannus. Now Eutyrannus, his claim to fame is that he is the largest dinosaur that we have traces of feathers in. He is a tyrannosaur with feathers, but not the normal feathers you would think of. He has more downy feathers or long, thin feathers, or like a filament there. And he would have been covered in that. And so we have him, he's a tyrannosaur with feathers. We have other tyrannosaurs with feathers as well. So we think that Tyrannosaurus Rex was also covered in feathers, but downy feathers like a giant baby chick. And Eutyranus, one of the things he shows us is where they were on a Tyrannosaurus body. So we find feathers on the arms, the legs, the tail, the neck, and running right down his back like a bohawk. And that is our Tyrannosaur. He's from Germany. Thor is a wolf on the way to being domesticated into a dog, or just the beginnings of a dog there. So he is from about 15,000 years ago, which is right in the middle of the range of the domestication of the dog. And he was found at, so down in the Rhine Valley of Germany. We just have his front half, and so the bones we see down here are his actual bones. We went and scanned his skeleton and made a copy of him for the skeletal mount. However, we did not have his back half. And so his back half comes from the CT scan of a modern dog. And so if you look very carefully at the bones of the front leg of Thor, you can see they're a lot bigger and more robust than his hind legs. That's because his hind legs comes from a modern dog, and Thor was about half wolf. And so he is a fun specimen, one of our youngest specimens we have at this museum. So, one of the dinosaurs we have in our museum is not a dinosaur at all, and that would be our skeleton of Velociraptor. Now, this is not a real specimen. It is not even a cast of a specimen. It is a prop made for the Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom movie. And if you watch that movie, you can see it in the background for 3 whole seconds. And so this was made for that movie, but it does a good job of showing us some of the differences between what we scientifically know about the Velociraptor and what they show in the movie. First and foremost, you take a look at our Velociraptor, you see he's kind of a small guy. In real life, Velociraptor was the size of a large dog, as opposed to the Velociraptor they show in the movies that are, about human height. We do have raptors about human height. One found after the movie called Utahraptor, but the actual Velociraptor was quite small. It was chosen by Michael Crichton because he liked the name Velociraptor. Another thing our skeleton shows you is the problem with the hands of Velociraptor. Because if you watch the movie, the Velociraptors hold their hands like this. This is like little bunny foo-foo. Velociraptor couldn't hold his hands like this. He held his hands like this. So the way I explain it is that Velociraptor could shake your hands, but he couldn't give you a high five. He could clap, but he couldn't play the piano. Reason is Velociraptor held his hands like this so he could reach out, grab his prey, and pull it into himself. Now, the third thing that was not terribly accurate in the Jurassic Park movies is they showed Velociraptor covered in scales. And we now know that Velociraptor would have been covered in feathers, including long feathers on his arms and legs. We now know that Velociraptor had wings. And what he was doing them, we don't know, but he had them. And because he had long feathers on his arms and his legs, we know that he had 4 wings. And so, strangely enough, that motion of where he held his hands, reaching out and grabbing his prey to bring it into himself, eventually became the flight stroke in his descendants, the birds. And so Velociraptor probably couldn't have flown, but his smaller relative, Microraptor, may have been able to do that. He might have been small enough and agile enough to fly. Probably not very well, but there's a good chance he could have done it. And so that is our movie star, Velociraptor.